The morning I almost lost everything started with a broken umbrella and a man who looked like he owned the city. I'd been working the front desk at Mercy General's oncology wing for 3 years by then. Not glamorous, not well paid, but mine. I knew every nurse by nickname, every attending by coffee order, every patient by face. The job paid $19.40 an hour, and after rent on my studio in Elmhurst, my student loans and groceries, I had exactly enough left over to feel like I was treading water rather than drowning. Which, honestly, felt like winning most days. That Tuesday in November, I'd sprinted from the 7 train in the rain because the extendable mechanism on my umbrella had snapped on the way out the door. I made it to the hospital entrance soaking from the shoulders down, hair plastered to my face, mascara somewhere around my chin. Very professional, very put together. I was pushing through the revolving door when a man stepped in from the other side and we both stopped, each waiting for the other to move first. The door required one of us to yield. I gestured for him to go ahead. He didn't. He just looked at me. This long, unhurried look like he had all the time in the world, and the rain outside wasn't a factor in his calculations, and he stepped back to let me through. I says, "Thank you," without really looking at him. He said nothing. I thought nothing of it. I should have. The hospital had been in some kind of acquisition limbo for 4 months. The nonprofit group that owned Mercy General had been running deficits, and word was that a private equity firm had put in an offer. The name floating around the nursing station was Voss Capital. Nobody knew much about them, except that they specialized in healthcare restructuring, which was a polished way of saying they bought struggling hospitals and made them profitable by cutting everything that wasn't technically required to keep a patient's heart beating. My supervisor, Donna, had pulled me aside in September and said, with her characteristic bluntness, "Start updating your resume, Lily. Just in case." I'd updated it, but I hadn't sent it anywhere because the idea of starting over somewhere new felt worse than staying put and hoping for the best. The oncology wing was my people. Mrs. Patterson in room 14, who always asked me about my mother. Old Mr. Gaines in 9, who'd given me a $1 scratch ticket on my birthday every year for 3 years running. I'd won $7 total. He was very proud of this, so I stayed. I hoped. I told myself it would probably be fine. It probably wasn't going to be fine. The man from the revolving door showed up again on Thursday. I was at the front desk when he walked in with 2 other men, both larger, both with the specific kind of stillness that comes from training rather than temperament. The 3 of them moved through the lobby like they'd mapped it in advance. Tailored coats, no luggage, not patients, not visitors. I clocked all of this in maybe 4 seconds and then returned to my screen because it wasn't my business. Then he stopped at my desk. "I have a 10 o'clock with the board," he said. I looked up. Dark eyes. A jaw like architecture. No scar anywhere on his face. I noticed this specifically because I'd just processed 3 new patient intake forms and was apparently in a detail-oriented mood. Early 40s, maybe? There was something controlled about him, the way very little showed in his expression, like he'd learned early that showing things was a liability. "Name?" I asked. "Callum Voss." The name landed somewhere in my chest like a stone into still water. I kept my face neutral. "1 moment, Mr. Voss." I called up to the boardroom, confirmed the meeting, printed his visitor badge. My hands were steady. I was proud of them for that. He took the badge, and I thought he'd move on. Instead, he paused, and I had the strange feeling he was actually looking at me, not at the desk, or the badge printer, or the space just past my shoulder, but at me specifically. "You were at the entrance Tuesday," he said. "In the rain." "I was," I said. "My umbrella broke." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Too small for that. "Did you get a new one?" "Not yet." He nodded once, like this was useful information, and walked toward the elevators. I sat with that conversation for the rest of my shift. It was such a small thing. 2 sentences about an umbrella, but there'd been something in his voice when he asked. Not condescension, not the automatic performance of small talk. Actual interest, like the answer mattered. I told myself I was projecting. I was clearly projecting. I found out what was in the acquisition proposal on a Friday afternoon. From the same place I found out most things. The small staff kitchen on the 3rd floor, where people talked too freely because they thought the bad acoustics gave them privacy. 2 of the board liaisons were in there, and I was invisible the way front desk staff often are to people who consider themselves several rungs above them. Voss Capital's offer included a complete restructuring of administrative staff. Non-clinical roles would be reduced by 60% within the first year. That meant me. That meant Donna. That meant the 4 other receptionists who rotated the desk with me. All of them women, most of them over 50, all of them people who'd been at Mercy General long enough that this job had become their identity. I drove home that evening and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could make myself go upstairs. The next week was a study in compartmentalization. I smiled at Mrs. Patterson. I collected Mr. Gaines's scratch ticket, another loser, he apologized. I processed intake forms and confirmed appointments and answered phones. And in the spaces between all of it, I thought about my lease, my loans, my savings account with its $4,200 that looked brave and small simultaneously. Callum Voss came back on a Wednesday. He wasn't there for a meeting this time. He came through the main entrance mid-afternoon, alone, no entourage. He walked to my desk with the same unhurried certainty as before. "Good afternoon," said, because I was professional, and also because I didn't know what else to say to the man who was quietly deciding my future. "Good afternoon." He set his visitor badge from the previous meeting on the counter. I forgot to return this. The badge was dated 10 days ago. He had not forgotten to return it. Nobody comes back to a hospital across town 10 days later to return a visitor badge. I took it from him. "Thank you." He stayed at the desk. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years, I said. "Do you like it?" I looked at him directly then, because the question felt oddly sincere, and sincerity from someone with his name deserved directness back. "I love it," I said. "I know that's not what people say about hospital admin work, but yes." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you love about it?" Nobody had ever asked me that, not in 3 years. I thought about it honestly. "The patients remember my name," I said. "That sounds small, but they're scared, most of them, and they come here over and over, and they learn your name. That means something." He looked at me for a long moment. "That doesn't sound small," he said. He left without saying anything else. I started noticing other things after that, small things. The way the badge scanner at the front entrance had been quietly upgraded. New model, much faster, without anyone on staff being formally notified. The way the parking validation machine that had been broken for 2 months was suddenly fixed. The way an anonymous donation appeared in the Patient Comfort Fund. Large enough that Donna mentioned it in our weekly briefing without knowing where it came from. I didn't let myself connect these things to him. That was magical thinking. That was the kind of story you told yourself when you needed something to be true. He came back a 3rd time on a Friday. "Lily," he said when he reached my desk. He said my name like he'd read it off my badge dozens of times and finally decided to use it. "Mr. Voss." I said Callum. I looked at him. "My name is Callum," he said, with the patience of someone who'd had to explain something obvious before, and found it less irritating the 2nd time. "You can use it." I said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is there something I can help you with today, Callum?" He almost smiled. Almost. It was there for about a 1/4 of a second before his face rearranged itself. "I'd like to take you to dinner, tomorrow if you're free." The lobby was not private. 2 nurses were walking past. The security guard at the door was not obviously listening, but absolutely was. I kept my voice very even. "I'm aware of who you are and what your company is proposing to do to this hospital," I said. "With respect, I don't think that's appropriate." He didn't flinch. "I understand," he said. "I'm asking anyway." I stared at him. "Why?" "Because you told me the patients remember your name," he said. "And I haven't been able to stop thinking about that." I didn't say yes. I said I'd think about it, which was what I said when I needed more time and less eye contact. I went home and called my best friend Tamara, who lived in Hoboken and had very strong opinions about everything, and I told her the whole thing. "The man buying your hospital asked you to dinner," she said. "Yes, and yes, and you said." I said I'd think about it. Long pause. "Lily, what is there to think about? He might be about to eliminate my job. He might also be about to eliminate your job, regardless of whether you go to dinner with him. You might as well eat first." This was technically rational and also completely beside the point, and also, annoyingly, somewhat persuasive. I texted him that evening. I'd gotten his number from the board liaison contact sheet, which was not technically an appropriate use of staff resources, but I decided that was between me and my conscience. I typed, tomorrow work 6 o'clock. He responded in under 2 minutes. I'll pick you up at the hospital. I typed back, I'll meet you there. A pause. Then of course, the restaurant was the kind of place where the menu didn't have prices. I knew what that meant. I was wearing my nicest dress, a green wrap I'd bought for my cousin's wedding, and I felt simultaneously overdressed and underdressed in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. But he stood when I arrived, which nobody under 50 did anymore, and he said, "You look beautiful," without any particular fanfare, like it was simply a fact he was noting for the record. We sat. He ordered a bourbon, I ordered wine, and then we did something I hadn't expected. We talked. Not carefully, not at arm's length. We talked like two people who'd both been in rooms where nobody really listened for a long time, and had quietly gotten hungry for the opposite. He asked about my mother. She'd passed 2 years ago, breast cancer, which was why the oncology wing felt personal to me in a way that was hard to articulate. He listened without trying to fix it or steer away from it. He just let me say it. I asked about him. He'd grown up in Pittsburgh, working-class neighborhood. Father who worked the steel mill until it closed. Got a scholarship to Wharton, spent 15 years building Voss Capital. I understand what it means for a place to close, he said. I've been in towns where the main employer left. I know what that does. Then why do you do what you do? I asked, and I asked it plainly, not as an accusation. He turned his glass on the table. Because if I don't do it, someone else will, and I'd rather it be someone who remembers what it looked like from the other side. I wanted to believe him. I also knew that was exactly what someone would say if they wanted to be believed, whether or not it was true. What's actually in the restructuring proposal? I said. He looked at me. You want to talk about that here? I want to talk about it before I decide how to feel about the rest of this. He considered me for a moment, not annoyed, more like reassessing something. Then he told me, the real version, not the board meeting version. Yes, administrative redundancies. No, not 60%. The number in circulation was based on a preliminary model that had since been revised significantly. The actual target was consolidating overlapping back-office functions, mostly billing and coding, roles that were already being done by a third-party contractor the hospital was overpaying. Clinical support staff, which included front desk patient-facing roles, was not on the table. Why didn't the board communicate that? I said. Because the board doesn't know yet, he said. We're still in negotiation. Information leaked before context did. I sat with that. How do I know you're telling me the truth? You don't, he said simply. Not yet. That was the right answer. A wrong answer would have been reassurance. The right answer was honesty about the limits of what I could verify. We stayed until the restaurant filled and emptied again. He drove me home, not to my building, just to the corner I asked him to stop at, because I wasn't ready for him to know exactly where I lived. He accepted this without comment. At the corner with the car idling and November cold pressing against the window, he said, I'd like to see you again. I know, I said. That's not a yes. That's not a no either. He almost smiled again. A little more of it this time. Good night, Lily. I got out of the car and walked to my building and stood in the elevator and thought, you are in so much trouble. The next 3 weeks happened in the particular way that early things happen, when both people are trying not to want it too much, and failing anyway. He texted in the mornings. Never anything demanding, just small things. A photo of Pittsburgh's skyline at dawn that he said looked like the one on his old bedroom wall. A question about whether I'd tried the Ethiopian place on 47th Street, that Tamara had actually been telling me to try for months. An article about a hospital in Ohio that had turned around its finances without cutting patient-facing staff, sent without comment, just the link. I responded. I didn't overthink it. I tried anyway. He came to the hospital twice more on business. Both times he stopped at my desk. Both times he was professional and brief, gave no indication to anyone watching that anything existed outside of the lobby context. This was somehow both disappointing and exactly right. I appreciated that he understood the line. The third time he came, he stopped at the desk and said quietly, "Dinner Friday?" I said, "Yes." The second dinner was at a smaller place, his choice, a Bosnian restaurant in Astoria, that he'd been going to since his 20s when he first moved to New York, back when he was nobody yet. The owner knew him, called him Callum, clapped him on the shoulder. This felt more real than anywhere, with no prices on the menu. He called me Sunshine for the first time that night. Out of nowhere, when I was laughing at something he'd said about a disastrous flight to Chicago in 2019. It came out naturally, like he'd been thinking it for a while. I looked at him. Sunshine? I said. You laugh like everything's going to be fine, he said. I find it useful. I didn't know what to do with that. I stayed somewhere I could look at later. In December, the board approved the acquisition. The formal announcement came on a Tuesday morning, internal memo distributed at 8 a.m. Most of my colleagues read it in a cluster by the nursing station. Faces doing complicated things. Donna came to find me specifically, which meant she'd already heard the real version. The front desk is staying, she said. The whole team. I confirmed it directly with the transition coordinator. I sat with that for a long time after she left. That evening, Callum texted me, "You probably heard today." I typed back, "I did. Are you all right?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Gaines's scratch tickets and 3 years of names I'd learned and been learned by. I thought about my mother, who had been in an oncology wing just like this one, and the woman at the front desk who had known her name, and what that had meant to both of us. "I think so," I typed. "Thank you. For what it's worth." "It's worth quite a lot," he wrote back. To me. The Friday before Christmas, a pipe burst in the hospital's east corridor and flooded 3 offices. Nobody was hurt, but by mid-afternoon half the building was running on backup systems, and the parking structure was inaccessible, and everyone was exhausted and strung out and managing patients' anxiety on top of their own. At 6 o'clock, I was still at my desk, covering for a colleague who'd gone home sick. Callum walked through the main entrance, looking like he'd come directly from somewhere else. Coat damp, tie loosened, something around his eyes was tiredness without defeat. He stopped at my desk. "Still here, covering?" I said. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the building for a meeting," he said. "I heard about the pipe." He looked at me, actually looked at me the way he had in the revolving door on the very first day, like he was making an assessment with full attention. "Go home, Lily. I'll have someone cover the last hour." "You can't do that." "I can," he said mildly. "I own the building." I laughed. I couldn't help it. He watched me laugh, and something in his face did the thing it always did when I laughed. Some very careful arrangement coming briefly undone. "Go home," he said again, softer. I went home. He called at 9. Not a text. A call, which felt different. More like something he'd decided rather than something that had slipped out. We talked for 2 hours. I was in my kitchen making tea I never drank because I forgot it on the counter. He was somewhere in his apartment in Tribeca that I'd never seen, talking to me in the dark based on the quality of the silence behind his voice. He said, at some point around 11, "I want to tell you something." "Okay," I said. "I came back to return the visitor badge because I wanted to see you again," he said. I knew it was a thin excuse. I didn't have a better one at the time. I was quiet for a moment. "I know," I said. "You knew. I knew." A pause. "And you gave me your number anyway." "I looked it up on the contact sheet," I said, "and texted you." Another pause, longer. When he spoke again, something in his voice had shifted, not the words, which were careful but underneath them. "Lily, I know," I said again, because I did. I knew what he was working up to, and I knew what I wanted to say, and I thought, this is one of those moments that exists before and after. I am in the before right now. I am about to step into the after. "I'm not good at this," he said. He stopped. "I'm better at structures and systems and knowing what something's worth before anyone else does. I'm less practiced at the other kind." "The other kind?" "Wanting something and not knowing how it ends," he said. "That kind." I put my forgotten tea down. "I want you to know," I said, "that I looked you up when you left that first day. Your net worth, your company history, your litigation record, all of it, and I went on 2 dinners with you anyway." He exhaled, a real breath with actual relief in it. "Sunshine, yeah," I said. "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Always. Are you in?" And here is what I knew about Callum Voss by December. I knew he sent articles without explanation and let me draw my own conclusions. I knew he remembered the name of my mother's oncologist, which I'd mentioned once in passing. I knew he was at his best in small rooms with honest people, and at his worst in boardrooms where everyone was performing. I knew that the restaurant owner in Astoria called him by name, and that he'd tipped the server without making it a performance. I knew that he'd looked at me in a revolving door, on a rainy Tuesday, like I was something worth pausing for, and that he'd never stopped looking at me that way since. "I'm in," I said. It was not simple after that. Nothing worth having is. His world had edges I hadn't fully appreciated from the lobby of a hospital. There were people in his professional orbit who did not want him attached to a woman who made 1940s an hour and had student loans and zero connections to anything they considered useful. There were meetings I wasn't told about. There was a week in February where he went quiet in a way that scared me, and when I finally pushed, it came out. A former business partner, now operating somewhere south of legal, had surfaced with an attempt at leveraging old shared history. Not a threat to me, a threat to him. He'd handled it. He was always handling something. But the night I found out the full scope of it, sitting in his apartment in Tribeca, which I'd finally seen, which had bare walls and too many books and windows, that looked out over the Hudson, like he'd bought the view specifically so he'd have somewhere to put his thoughts, I told him I was scared. Not of him. Of losing this. Of it all somehow collapsing before we'd built enough of it to matter. He sat next to me on the floor, back against the couch. He didn't offer reassurance. He said, "I know, I'm scared too." That was when I understood that this was real. Reassurance is performance. Fear is honesty. "Tell me about Pittsburgh," I said. Not because I didn't already know the broad strokes, but because I wanted the smaller ones. The ones he kept. He talked for a long time. His father's hands. The particular smell of the mill neighborhood in summer, the scholarship letter that arrived on a Thursday, and how he'd sat on the front stoop until dark, reading it over and over, not quite believing it was addressed to him. His mother crying. Him not knowing how to cry, so he'd just sat there, holding the letter until the streetlights came on. I leaned my head against his shoulder somewhere in the middle of all of it. He kept talking. His hand found mine. Outside, the Hudson was dark and very still, and the city lights sat on top of it, like something that had always known this was where it belonged. Spring came, Mrs. Patterson was discharged in April. Remission, full and clean and beautiful. She hugged me at the front desk and said, "I told you, Lily. I told you it was going to be fine." I cried after she left. Donna brought me a paper cup of bad coffee and patted my shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right, Mr. Gaines gave me my 4th scratch ticket in April. I won $2. He was delighted. I told him it was the best $2 I'd ever won. He said he had a feeling I was going to have a very good year. He was right, it turned out. On a Sunday in May, Callum and I were in the Bosnian restaurant in Astoria. Our restaurant by then, the place we went when we wanted to be somewhere that felt like it had existed before us and would go on after. The owner's wife had started putting bread on the table before we ordered. Small acknowledgement. Recognition. Callum was telling me about a project he was considering in Pittsburgh. A hospital, actually, a struggling community one. He'd been going back and forth on it for months. He talked me through the numbers, the social impact modeling, the part of him that wanted to do it, and the part that was cautious about wanting things for reasons that weren't strictly financial. I listened. I asked questions. I told him what I thought, which was that the part of him that wanted to do it for the right reasons was not a liability. "People think that's naive," he said. "People are wrong," I said. He looked at me. That look again, the one that had started with a revolving door and a broken umbrella and a Tuesday in November, that I couldn't have known would matter. "I love you," he said. He said it like the other first things he'd said to me. Simply, like a fact he was noting for the record. The restaurant was warm. Outside, May was doing its best. The bread on the table was still good. "I love you too," I said, obviously. He laughed, a real one, full, the kind he didn't give everyone. "Obviously," he repeated. "You were pretty obvious," I told him. "From the start, the visitor badge." "The visitor badge," I confirmed. He shook his head. He was still smiling. I thought about that umbrella, broken in a doorframe on a rainy Tuesday, the thing that had made me slow down for 1 extra second in a revolving door, and how impossible it would be to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. How small the hinge is on the door that opens to the rest of your life. Some things just take one moment, the right one, arriving exactly when it's supposed to.